To the outside world, the clutters are displayed as a perfect example of what some consider to be the American dream. However, throughout the book, Capote reveals that this is simply not true. The clutter sociogram not only represents the complicated relationship between members of the clutter family and outsiders, but also the complicated relationships between the family members themselves. At the center of the sociogram, Lily and I drew the clutter's house with Kenyon, Herb, Bonnie, and Nancy surrounding it. Lily and I decided to draw the other two clutter family members, Eviana and Beverly, farther away from the family, representing the fact that they had moved away. To symbolize Herb, we drew a tractor to represent the fact that he was a well-respected rancher and spent most of his time running his ranch. To connect Herb and Bonnie, we drew a dashed line connected by a wedding ring to represent their broken marriage. To symbolize Bonnie, we drew a dark cloud, symbolizing her experience with postnatal depression and how that affected her personality, as well as many other aspects of her life. To connect Bonnie and her children, we drew dashed lines symbolizing their distant relationships as a result of Bonnie's mental illness. Kenyon's symbol is a frying pan because that was one of the last inventions that he made before he was murdered. Kenyon's inventions reveal that he preferred to be isolated rather than be with other people. To connect Kenyon and Nancy, we drew an infinity sign symbolizing their close relationship as siblings. For Nancy's symbol, we drew a star because the community in Holcomb viewed Nancy as a perfect daughter and like the community's shining star. To connect Nancy and Herb, we used a thicker wavy line to represent the fact that they had a good relationship, but it wasn't perfect, hence the waves. We also used a wavy line to connect Herb and Kenyon, but the line is slightly thinner than Nancy and Herb's because their bond wasn't as close. Nancy's best friend, Susan Kidwell, was represented by a paintbrush because Susan and Nancy had hoped to go to university and be art majors together before Nancy was murdered. Nancy and Susan are connected by a thick, curly line representing their strong bond and the fact that they were with each other through the ups and downs of their lives. Kenyon's friend, Bob Jones, was represented as a rabbit because Kenyon and Bob liked to go hunting rabbits together. Bob and Kenyon were also connected by a curly line, but it was thinner and broken, representing the fact that they were best friends but grew apart after Bob got a girlfriend. To represent Bobby Rupp, we drew a basketball symbolizing the fact that he played basketball at his school. To connect Nancy and Bobby, we drew a line of heart symbolizing the fact that they were in a relationship and were each other's first loves. Bob Johnson is represented by money because he sold Herb a life insurance policy before he was murdered. Bob Johnson and Herb are connected by dollar signs to represent the fact that their relationship was based on the life insurance that Bob sold to Herb. To represent Mrs. Ishida, we drew a flower because the book mentioned that Mrs. Ishida liked to grow flowers. To connect Mrs. Ishida and Herb, we drew a line of arrows pointing from Mrs. Ishida to Herb, symbolizing the respect that Mrs. Ishida had for Herb. To represent Mrs. Helm, we drew a mop symbolizing the fact that Mrs. Helm was the clutter's maid. To connect Bonnie and Mrs. Helm, we drew a thin, wavy line to represent the fact that Bonnie and Mrs. Helm had a close relationship as Bonnie felt that she could confide in Mrs. Helm. Bonnie and Aviana, the other two clutter family members, are in the back of the sociogram because they don't live in Holcomb anymore. Aviana is represented by a wedding ring to symbolize the fact that she is married and has a child, and Beverly is represented by a nurse hat to symbolize the fact that she was studying to become a nurse. They are both connected to their family with broken wavy lines to represent the fact that they are not as close as they used to be because they are older and have separate lives.
Throughout Capote's In Cold Blood, Dick and Perry take the spotlight when it comes to the Clutter family murder. While creating this sociogram, J. Mack and I were able to dive deeper into the connections between Dick and Perry and the characters who knew them, as well as analyze why these characters may have had a particular role and why Dick and Perry were the way they were. Starting off in the center of the sociogram, we drew Dick and symbolized him as the car he wrecked, and then Perry is symbolized as the bird he dreamed about. To demonstrate Dick's influence on Perry, we connected them by shining the lights from the car onto Perry. Above and below the two, we included Dewey and Dr. Jones. We placed them in a spot where we could connect them both to Dick and Perry because both Dewey and Dr. Jones played a role in Dick and Perry's lives after they were accused with murder. Agent Dewey was the lead investigator in the case, while Dr. Jones was the psychiatrist that Dick and especially Perry spoke to. Branching off of Dewey, we included Agent Harold Nye, who was Dewey's very smart right-hand man. As for Dick and Perry separately, there were many people in their lives that played key roles for their character development. For Perry, there was his father. To demonstrate him and his father's connection, we drew a jagged line to infer that Perry and his father were not very close and had a rocky relationship. Perry's father was described as a lone wolf in the text, which is why we symbolized him as a wolf. Then there was Barbara, who was Perry's only living sister, who lived in San Francisco away and feared Perry. Although Barbara and Perry used to be close, their relationship became very disconnected, which is why we used a dashed line to connect the two. Next, we included Willie J., who was a mentor to Perry while he was in prison. We symbolized him with the cross because he was very religious and used arrows heading off the paper to connect them because they drifted apart fairly quickly. Finally, for Perry, there was Don, who was a friend of Perry's in the Army and one of the only people who visited him in jail. Don and Perry had a pretty firm relationship, which is why we incorporated a wavy thin line to express their relationship. Unlike Perry, Dick's family was more picture perfect, and Dick grew up in a stable household having a good relationship with his mother and father. We drew a thin wavy line to demonstrate the firm relationship they had. Another character in Dick's life was Carol, his ex-wife who he had divorced when he met another lady. To connect them, we drew broken hearts to express their rocky past and breakup. Finally, Dick had Floyd. Floyd was a man Dick had met in prison who had worked for Herb Clutter in the past and is a key component for the Clutter murders. The chain to connect them represents how important and key Floyd was for the causation of the murders.